Kurt Russell's Western classic Tombstone features a huge number of real historical figures, but it doesn't fully explain what happened to the survivors of the Epps fight against the cowboys. There are plenty of deaths in Tombstone, from the righteous killings of hardened criminals like Curly Bill Brocious, Powers Booth, to the tragic demise of Doc Holliday, Val Kilmer. In fact, by the ending of Tombstone, most of the movie's cast had died, and only a handful of major characters actually survived. Those lucky few survivors would go on to live for several more years, and viewers may wonder what became of them. There is a short bit of narration at the end of Tombstone that explains the eventual fates of some major characters, but it doesn't capture the full story of their lives after leaving Arizona. Some of the survivors lived long, happy, and wildly eventful lives, while others met their tragic demise just years later. Tombstone also gets a few facts about the survivors wrong, and one character who died in the movie likely lived for at least a few more years. Everyone who made it out of Tombstone alive, however, had something interesting happen to them. Wyatt Epp. Wyatt married Josephine and lived adventurously until 1929. The events of Tombstone were just the start of Wyatt Epp's incredibly long and eventful life. As shown in Tombstone, Wyatt married Josephine Marcus, Dana Delaney, and began traveling the country with her, getting into various adventures along the way. At various times, Wyatt worked as a boxing referee, a gold prospector, and as a movie consultant during Hollywood's golden age. He also moved all across the country. Wyatt Epp opened a saloon in Nome, Alaska, and he also reunited with his brother, Virgil, at some point in California. The list of things Wyatt didn't do after Tombstone is shorter. Wyatt Epp also had a huge amount of time after the gunfight at the OK Corral. Tombstone takes place in and around 1882, but Wyatt Epp didn't die until 1929, when he was 80 years old. Ultimately, it was a urinary tract infection that took Wyatt's life, via Casey Terfatilla, and he died in his home on January 13, 1929, with Josephine by his side. He had no children, but his legend has lived on for well over a century. Josephine Marcus. Josephine and Wyatt traveled and gambled across the United States. Josephine's life after the events of Tombstone was very similar to Wyatt's, as the couple were reportedly inseparable. Josephine and Wyatt traveled the country together for decades, though she lived almost 20 years longer than him. Josephine Marcus died on December 19, 1944 in the same home she shared with Wyatt in Los Angeles, via West Adams Heritage Association. Both Josephine's and Wyatt's bodies were cremated and buried together in Colma, California. Virgil Epp. Virgil worked as a lawman and saloon owner until he died of pneumonia in 1905. Sam Elliott as Virgil Epp in Tombstone. Aside from Wyatt, the only Epp brother to survive their time in Tombstone was Virgil, Sam Elliott. As shown in the film, Virgil was the victim of an assassination attempt by the cowboys, and he lost the use of his left arm. He and his wife at the time, Allie, moved back to Colton, California for 2 years while his wounds healed. In spite of his injury, however, Virgil continued to have a successful career as a lawman. Virgil was employed by the Southern Pacific Railroad as armed protection, and he was later the first city marshal of Colton, via Histranet. Later in life, Virgil owned both saloons and mining operations. In Vanderbilt, California, Virgil owned a saloon named Earp's Hall. In 1895, Virgil moved to Prescott, Arizona, and began mining. Unfortunately, he was inside a mine during a cave-in, which seriously injured him yet again. Those wounds would ultimately prove fatal, as Virgil Epp died of pneumonia in 1905, partially because he was too weak to fight off the infection, via Goldfield Historical Society. Virgil had one daughter, Nellie, who survived him after his death. Mattie Blaylock. Mattie returned to prostitution and died from opium overdose in 1888. While Wyatt and Josephine got their storybook romantic ending, the same can't be said for his previous wife, Mattie Blaylock, Dana Wheeler Nicholson. After the events of Tombstone, Wyatt effectively abandoned Mattie for Josephine and left her to fend for herself. As such, Mattie returned to the profession she was in prior to meeting Wyatt, prostitution. Mattie left Tombstone and did sex work in Pinal, Arizona, until her death in 1888. Unfortunately, as Tombstone depicted, Mattie was also addicted to laudanum, and she either died by suicide or by accidental opium overdose. Ike Clanton. Clanton continued his life of crime until he was shot to death in 1887. Stephen Lang as Ike Clanton looking angry in Tombstone. One of the only cowboys that Wyatt Epp spared, Ike Clanton, Stephen Lang, didn't live much longer after avoiding the Epp vendetta. After Wyatt left Tombstone, Ike Clanton rejoined the rest of his family and began operating as a criminal and bandit yet again. The Clantons had a ranch and regularly engaged in murder and thievery. In June 1887, a Pinkerton named Detective Jonas Brighton was on Ike's trail, and he shot and killed the former cowboy when he tried to draw on the lawman, via Apache County Critic. According to Brighton, Ike Clanton was shot in the heart and died before his body hit the ground. Sherman McMaster's. Contrary to Tombstone, there are three conflicting accounts of McMaster's death. Tombstone, Michael Rooker wearing cowboy outfit in front of others on horseback. Tombstone is fairly accurate the real history of the Ebb brothers' time in Arizona, but it got one major detail wrong. Sherman McMaster's, Michael Rooker, dies at some point in Tombstone, and his beaten body was delivered to Wyatt when Johnny Ringo invited him to a solo gunfight. However, in real life, McMaster, Tombstone added an S to his name, has three conflicting accounts of his death. One letter claimed he died during the Ebb vendetta, but Wyatt Epp himself claimed McMaster died in 1898 while serving in the Spanish-American War, and McMaster's siblings claimed he died in Colorado in 1892, via Paul Cool. Historians generally tend to accept the final account, that McMaster died in Colorado in 1892, due to the fact that it came from his relatives in a legal filing, and because McMaster didn't appear in any army registers. In any event, the fact that Wyatt Epp claimed McMaster died in 1898 is proof enough that Tombstone got his death wrong. That being said, McMaster's death was still well done and added to the film's suspense, and it's far too trivial of a complaint to mar Tombstone's impeccable legacy.